Suzanne, it's a pleasure to be talking with you. How are you doing? Your fabulous glasses.
Morning, Natalie. Or good afternoon, I should say to you. I'm doing very well today. Thank you.
Well, I've been looking forward to this. And I want to launch with the not insignificant question that I always offer my guests, which is what do you sense or imagine is going on in the global human psyche right now?
In prep for this, I listened to a few of your episodes, and I mean, I think all of your guests kind of respond in the same way, which is like, Natalie, that's a tough question to be asking right off the bat. Um,
Yep.
Kind of heavy, especially now. Um, Look, I'm not an expert on this by any stretch, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later about empathy. But I think that I don't know. I mean, I think in the human psyche, it's a time of great uncertainty. I think it's a time of some instability, and I think that that can be really difficult for a lot of people. I think for any of us at any point in time. And I think that what that means is that you're just trying to find some sense of control and some sense of stability. And I think we're all trying to find that, individually and then collectively. And so I don't think that that's prolific by any stretch, but I do think that that is a common thread
Yeah.
in the global human psyche, if we're going to talk at that altitude.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely resonate with that. And thinking about all of the turbulence that we're facing, the disconnection, the tech advance. I've been keeping an eye out on all of the AI advances that are happening, even in just the last week. There's just so much instability, as you say, and tumult. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, perhaps from a tech perspective, but you also mentioned empathy. So whatever perspective you want to come at this from, what do you think are some of the more helpful stories that we tell ourselves about our roles as individuals or as a species? What are some of the narratives that are giving you cause for optimism right now?
Well, I mean, I think the power of technology is it can do so much good in the
Mm.
world. It has done so much good in the world. And I'm lucky enough to have been a part of that, being at this company, and I am proud of that. And I think that that's super important for us to all remember. Um, at least for my whole career, and clearly, here at Google, I think we care a lot about being helpful, being a servant-based company, and that, it's about how do we do good for any given person or any collective. And I think that that is universal. That's evergreen. That's not something that is, a flash in the pan. We only do it here, but we don't do it there. This is why and how I wake up every morning. This is how I lead teams. And I think at time of great change, you just have to go to first principles, and that's a first principle.
So when it comes to the open internet, we know that digital ads kind of function as the engine, and this is how we access the content that we love for free and how small businesses can grow. What do you see as some of the biggest opportunities and threats to the internet as we know it today? Perhaps focusing on the opportunities first.
Yeah. Well, digital advertising is the economic engine powering the internet, and it's a massive force for good. We have to remember this. It's, supports access to content and services for billions of people, like free of charge. And we can't take that for granted. It enables the growth of businesses, publishers, and, content creators of all sizes around the world. This is massively good for humanity, and has been a privilege to be a part of. And it's not work that's done, and it's not work that we take lightly. So for me, the biggest opportunity right now is restoring people's trust in ads, and we're doing that through building products like my ad center, which is our consumer friendly privacy tool, which provides people transparency and choice and control, and the opportunity to actually give us, sort of their their needs and their expectations when it comes to sort of their ads that they want to see and the relevance that they expect, which is very exciting because, you know, when all this comes together, like ensuring people can feel really safe online and in control of the ads that they see is really critical in restoring, you know, sort of trust in advertising. Probably the biggest threat is to just take it all for granted. And I think that it's important that you have to continue to inspire content creation, but you have to inspire sort of the monetization of that so that people can, you know, make a living. You also have to, you know, ensure that it is content that is very valuable for consumers. And I think that that's just a part of a healthy, open internet that is really important to me and to us as a company.
And so one of the things, because I often give a lot of talks around behavioral science and about the user and us being the user, you know, whatever companies we work for, we all consume stuff, right? And so when it comes to good relationships and thinking about the biggest drivers to earning feelings of trust and safety, in particular online, I'm curious as to why you think that's, I mean, I have my own ideas on this, but why you think it's so important, because it is clearly important. Trust, safety, we've got new regulations heading our way. We've got a lot of shockwaves coming through from AI and all sorts of generated stuff. Like, there's a lot of change. So what are the roles of trust and safety? How do you see this taking shape in today's ecosystem?
Well, I think that they're cornerstones of today's ecosystem, right? I think that, you know, any brand, any product that we get to use day in and day out, we have the opportunity to sort of build a trusted, you know, sort of relationship or interaction with the person who's actually using that product. And I think that, you know, consumers and users, all of us are wanting and expecting, you know, privacy and I am very committed to that, you know, and I think that that's an important and reasonable expectation. And I think that that serves as like sort of as we're evolving and as, you know, as the internet is evolving, but also as the economic engine of the internet is evolving, I think that the whole industry has to really pay attention to this and take note of this. And this is some of the work that, you know, I lead on my team, and it's very, very exciting. And I really love bringing back this data and this insight and this sentiment from users all around the globe. So that we can actually ensure that we are, you know, like we say, you know, safe by default, private by design. But it's not just a tagline. It's like how we actually work. And I get to lead a team to help make sure that that shows up in everything that we do every day.
The other question I was thinking about, you know, the ways in which people make sense of data and ads, is that there is quite a lot of confusion around what data is used and where and how, and this really can cause a problem in terms of eroding trust. What are some of the misconceptions that you come across most often?
Well, you know, misconceptions about how data is used in advertising and digital advertising are sort of everywhere. And I think that if I didn't work in ads, I would probably have some of the same questions. It's a very complex, you know, very technical space that has changed a lot in a relatively short amount of time. But it's something that my team is always trying to get to the bottom of and really address. And, you know, we feel like this is, you know, absolutely at the core of our mission, like as a design organization, as a UX organization. And so that means like really tackling some of these misconceptions like head on and providing, you know, what we know is more transparency about how data is used or not. We know that that's super, super important. And over the years of doing research, we've come across a couple of overarching themes related to data privacy. You know, number one is, you know, people saying like, hey, I don't know how my data is being used. You know, often in the digital ads, you know, industry, you'll find privacy tools are maybe hard to find, or they're like written in like legalese, and that can be really hard to understand. The second thing is that, people are saying, hey, I don't have control over my data. And in order to make a change in their data settings, people, might have to go through a pretty arduous or confusing, process. So, here, and at Google, we want to tackle this differently. We want to tackle this sort of head on. We believe privacy means being transparent, and putting choice and control back into their hands. And it's central to how we build products. We've done a lot of research about this, and I'm excited that we're actually delivering that. Our products are secure by default and private by design. And private by design means, this team, like what I'm doing and what I'm really helping the product organization do is actually ensure that we put users in control. So we bring this to life through our privacy tool called My Ad Center. And it's really easy to use. And I hope that you go and use it, like go search for My Ad Center and, log in and put yourself in the driver's seat of your advertising experience. You can decide which brands and topics, you want to see ads from, which is really compelling, and, determine whether or not the information, that we have is accurate, and whether or not you want us to use it, and whether or not you want to actually give us more information. That's all in your control, so that we can actually deliver more relevant ads, for you. And you can access it either through, an ad directly, there's like this little 3-dot menu, you can access it there. And, we can even limit, sensitive categories like, weight loss, alcohol, gambling, and, things like that. Like, so you can tell us like at multiple altitudes, like, I want more of this, I want less of this, which is really, really an amazing, and I think one of a kind experiences out there, to really provide that transparency and real control to consumers about their advertising experience. We're seeing it in the usage, that this is really a valuable experience. Over 800 million monthly users are coming to it, giving us like over, 300 million, sort of data inputs about and settings on what they want. And they're able to see this across, search and YouTube and Discover. And so we're actively seeing this value exchange and this experience of putting transparency and choice and control back into the user's hands as being something that's very compelling.
It's interesting. I think that transparency thing, one of the things I talk about quite a bit at in my keynotes and at events, is how our desire for self-determination shows up in all areas of life, across different nationalities, ethnicities, ages. And it's this idea that we have this yearning to have these 3 deep psychological needs met. So autonomy or agency, a sense of competence, and a sense of belonging. And what you find, particularly to your point around transparency and trust, which is so integral to belonging and then also to competence. Am I going to be able to do the things that I want based on this foundation of trust with this company that I'm interfacing with? That transparency often also includes our ability to give unpalatable information respectfully to the client. So I'm thinking things like, in my own life, it might be a streaming service and they're increasing the price, but they tell me how much, they tell me when, they tell me why, and they give me the option to cancel. And people underrepresent that in their equations of how much they trust someone or a company. Like, it's not just about the good stuff, it's also about the unpalatable stuff. So that point around transparency, I think, is really key. And so thinking about the bargains that we make, the trade-offs that we make when we're thinking about relevant ads. And when we're thinking about relevant ads, I'd like to start that question by asking you, what does that mean for you, a relevant ad for a customer? Do you think that that users, folks like me, are willing to share our data? It could be our demographic or psychographic data, our income, in exchange for access to content. What are you seeing there in that world?
So In short, yes. Um, so I think that, we've been all making that trade-off for years. And that value exchange, I think, has been something that I think for the most part has been really well understood. You go to the open internet, right? And this content is sort of free, and you understand that, like, and users have been very clear that they understand, what that value exchange is. But they also have higher expectations of relevance, right? And this is where digital advertising gets super interesting, right? It's like, how do you leverage the data that the user or the consumer is willing to share with you in exchange for a more relevant ad experience, right? And Google pioneered this with search ads, right? Like, really, what is relevance, and what does that mean, and what do we need to actually ensure that we're being as relevant as possible? And what we found is that we can use less and less of your personal data to do that, and use more modeling to actually be able to provide you that relevance. Now, as a consumer, so that's sort of what's happening on our side. But back to what we talked about before about all these findings about trust. We found that the ability to give more choice and more control to the actual user themselves was a very compelling, very needed and necessary sort of set of inputs that we haven't seen in the industry before. And so what we provoked was, let's create an actual interface that is a product where users can actually go in and tell us very clearly what is more relevant or not relevant in places where they're not necessarily searching. Maybe it's on feed services or something like that. And so we came up with a product called My Ad Center. It enables any given person to go and say, hey, for this value exchange, you can have this information, this information, this information, this information. And then I will also tell you, like, or ask for more in this topic area or that topic area, or from this brand or from that brand. And there's nothing like this in the industry, right? There's just nothing like this in the industry. And it is purposefully built to provide transparency, choice, and control. A recent example for myself, just as an of really what relevance means and how this insight, all these insights, and have really manifested itself in this product called My Ad Center, is I'm going through a home remodel. It would be really helpful for me to find more home furnishing companies that I may or may not know of, right? So that I could actually find the cool lamps or the cool couches, or, like all the stuff that I'm looking for, doors, windows. I'm looking for all those things right now. And I went into My Ad Center and I said, I want more home furnishings, and I want more from these brands or those brands, whatever. And now when I go onto multiple Google surfaces, like, I'm actually seeing those, and I'm finding new businesses, that I never even knew existed. And that's the value. That's exciting. That's valuable. That's helpful. And it's relevant to me.
And it feels a lot more bidirectional, more of a kind of a dialogue than just sitting waiting to be broadcast something, or be like followed around the internet with an ad for something you just bought that you no longer need, or you had a sibling come over, they've had kids, they use your browser to look for nappies, and now you're getting served nappies, all of that stuff. It feels a lot more interactive and collaborative, which is interesting because that is new.
Yes. And, just as evidence that this is actually working. I mean, we launched this like not that long ago, and we already have, like, I think north of 800 million, monthly active users. So people are saying like, this is what would actually be more helpful for me. This is what would actually be more relevant for me. And so we know that we are starting to really address this need. And we believe that we have the evidence now about this value exchange. And we feel like we're gathering more and more of the evidence and understanding of real choice, real control. And that's exciting. It's super exciting.
So thinking then, because it's about data share and it's about choice and it's about being able to have some kind of sense of decision making over what you want to receive. And then presumably from a business perspective, if I'm thinking about, I actually don't use that, but if I did, I have friends who do, thinking about customers who are actively seeking them out, the engagement is going to be higher because there's a better match, which is a good thing. So if we're thinking about how all of us as users think about data sharing when it comes to receiving that kind of helpful online experience or a good fitting with what we're looking for in a brand that can provide that, what role do you think good design plays in making that more possible, making it easier, making it more fluent for folks?
I'm so glad you asked this question.
I do love a good design. I do.
Well, I mean, this has been my entire professional career, right? And I'm sure you've had plenty of designers on your show here, and I think that really what's at the cornerstone of any great design, I believe, is empathy. And I think empathy plays like an outsized role in actually first being able to identify problems that need to be solved and articulating them in a like user back or consumer back or customer back way or who back way, is the way that I sort of talk about it internally. It's like, that's very, very, very critical. You have to start there. If you start from a solution instead of starting from a problem, then I think you're already sort of off the blocks in the wrong way. You have to be empathic. You have to be humble in that empathy. You have to be very observant and curious. And you have to be willing to go and co-design with whomever your who is. And I think that when it comes to providing choice and control, and what we've done with something like My Ad Center, we don't overwhelm it with a ton of, legalese, which you can imagine we have to thread a line between, sort of what really has to be said from a compliance standpoint, what we really want to afford from a relevance and a value standpoint, and what users really can understand. That is not easy. That's a science and an art in and of itself. But at the heart of it is like real human understanding. The art and the science of research and going back out over and over and over and over again. I mean, we do hundreds of iterations, of the work that goes out every day to ensure that people understand it. Right? To ensure that we authentically are communicating and matching our intention with the actual experience that we put out in the world. And it has to come from a place of empathy, humility, curiosity, right? And then, from that, a really deep desire to be helpful, inclusive, right? Human, trustworthy, right? All these things matter. And, I've worked with teams long enough to know that that's why people get up in the morning. Everybody wakes up in the morning hoping to be able to have this opportunity to achieve that goodness, for a who somewhere in the world. And design plays somewhat of an outsized role in setting that foundation and painting the picture of the possibility of what that can be, and also holding teams accountable for actually attaining that. like in the humility of going out and doing the research and getting the evidence that you're not there yet, or you got it, whichever way. And then that becomes part of the way that we build products, services, value, in the world.
As you're saying that, one of the things that I'm thinking, my God, this must be such an interesting and challenging space to work in, is that when you are in a position where your organization has to adapt itself in terms of the design it provides for people all over the world. Yes, of course, we want more transparency. We don't necessarily want all the details. You're talking about treading that fine line, the art and science of giving people, and I know sort of when I've worked with companies in the world of finance, there's so much in the world of compliance, legalities, and you have to be really careful. I mean, one has to. But aside all of that stuff and translating that so that people don't have to go through all the details and they're not overwhelmed, there's got to be that kind of threshold or tipping point where someone using the platform, a user, me or my friends, whatever, feel reassured. And thinking about, because I live in Spain now and I was living in London before, that there are places where part of that reassurance is also about adapting to the cultures and expectations and norms. But I'm wondering for you, whether you want to go down the cultural route or not, what is that sweet spot, that tipping point where folks using services feel reassured, where there's that kind of, the exchange is right? It's a bit of a complex question.
Well, I mean, it's a complex question if you're expecting like a very specific answer, but actually it's not that complex of a question, right? If you go back to first principles, if you just go back to first principles, it is about really understanding and caring about your whoever that is, right? And that means the responsibility of knowing and being able to define what great will be when you are done. And that's not, there's no perfect like rubric for that, right? There's no perfect rubric for that. I mean, we are constantly sort of, I'm constantly in pursuit of having more sophistication in knowing whether or not we have really hit that sweet spot, right? I want that sophistication and I want those nuances at a broader scale. But what I know for sure is that even if I don't have that at scale, I have the processes and the craft and the people that I get to work with day in, day out that understand that is a core responsibility. It's a core responsibility to know what that tipping point is. If you don't know what that is, then you don't know when you're done. So all the problem definition, when you actually do this type of work, you have to first articulate the problem. Then you have to articulate what great will look like. And then only then do you actually get to start to create solutions. And I think that is, that's part of the joy of being a designer and, being a problem solver is like sort of understanding that. And it can be a very iterative, an iterative practice, but very compelling and very exciting. And it can be applied to, so much. It doesn't have to be applied just to a digital product experience or a digital ad experience. That can be applied to organizations. It can be applied to policies. It can be applied to processes. And I think that's just it's the process that helps you define that tipping point.
And I'm guessing, with the process, a lot of what's important to the way in which you guys work is the emphasis on research that is ongoing, that allows you to build a body of understanding, a body of knowledge. Yes. And some of your more recent research looking into the nuts and bolts, unpacking consumer views on privacy in particular, which has been huge and continues to be a pressing concern, and transparency, which you've mentioned. When you were looking at privacy and transparency, which are clearly interrelated, what were some of the insights that stood out most to you and to your team in terms of things perhaps that you weren't expecting, perhaps some of the things that you kind of had a hunch for? What came out of that research?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of spoke to a little some of this earlier. I think first and foremost, it was, you know, defining what it actually even means. I find like in the industry or even internally, like when I'm working with teams, we all use like language or words where maybe my definition of relevance is different than your definition of relevance.
Right. You have to come to some common territory of understanding.
Really do. And not amongst ourselves. Like, I mean, part of that has to happen, right? So wait. If we're going to work on relevance, like, what are we really talking about here, right? You have to do that, but you have to, again, like in the spirit of that humility and curiosity and like, service to your who, you have to go calibrate on what that means to them using their word, understanding really what does that mean. And I think that, from a privacy and trust standpoint, we had to go back to the basics, right? We had to go back to like actually defining that. We could all feel it. If I asked you like, well, what's trust?
Yeah.
I think that,
I'm thinking now, actually, how would I even answer that? But yeah.
right. So it becomes this thing. It's like, it when you have it, but how could you describe it? And so
yeah, you're moving that sensation into kind of a verbal template or map of the territory.
And not only that, like pillars, a way to measure it, right? A way to measure that consistently for all parts of the ecosystem. So if we go back to like what I was talking about earlier, like my job is, really to lead a design organization, a UX organization, which includes researchers for the ads business, at Google. And part of that means that I am responsible for experiences for, end users, for publishers, and for advertisers and all their marketers and their agency partners and so on and so forth. So when it comes to defining something like trust, we had to go out and find that out and define that for all parts of that ecosystem. And that's been a couple years worth of work already. And we do not consider that complete. We are constantly learning and understanding. It's like, okay, well, when we launch a feature like this, is that actually aligning to a trustworthy sort of, a trustworthy launch? Why not? Do they actually understand what we're trying to do? Why not? And so remaining sort of curious and accountable to really the promise that needs to be sort of created and maintained is super important. I think it kind of goes back to your very first question about like the global human psyche, right? It just, I want stability, and part of stability is I need a little bit of control. And yeah, so that becomes a big part of what we have to do. And there's, the research is just so compelling, and it's just, it keeps coming in and basically saying the same thing.
As you're talking about trust, I kind of see it as and you use the word ecosystem, which I think is it really captivates the internet at large and all of the things that make up what is an evolving nodal system. I'm curious, when you're talking about trust in your research, how trust overlaps or is different in terms of definition from these different stakeholders, because you're looking for the points of convergence, right? We were talking earlier about matching customers with brands so that everyone feels that they're getting a positive value exchange from the relationship. We already talked about that, weaving it in. Where are the sweet spots in terms of trust? Because it's a complex equation to navigate.
And that sort of comes back to like providing users with something like My Ad Center, where they have that choice, they have that control, they have that transparency, where they could say, I mean, I'm sure this has happened to you, where it was like, I thought I saw a really cool bag. Like the other day, I saw an ad for a really cool bag. I couldn't remember what the name of it was. I just remember what the shape of it was. I remembered, I'm a visual person, so I kind of remembered like what the background was. I was like, it was a tan bag, like, but I couldn't remember what the name of it was, right? I could go to, something like my ad center and like go look at my ads and go, that's there it was, which is super cool. Or,
Mm.
the ability to do that with, my husband, where I'm like, there was this light fixture that I thought would look really great in the front room, taking screenshots of that, sending it and saying, hey, what about this? That is super, super compelling. Like when we can kind of get all that, like sort of singing together, it's a win-win-win.
Also, I'm thinking so we're recording this in November, but with Christmas not so far away, and on my birthday's in January, I think this is actually a great way to get an advice on what to buy for your partner or for your kids for Christmas. I'm just going to have a look. Yeah, very helpful. So you've talked already about some of the examples of good design practices, principles that can help build trust and privacy and autonomy, which I think is crucial with consumers. Are there any other design principles or practices that you felt really drove the creation of My Ad Center? Because I'm struck by the fact that historically, giving customers more control is quite an uncommon step to take. And so it's really intriguing.
Isn't it?
I mean, over to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is sort of what we need to really lean into when it comes back to like sort of the first principles of great design, great product. It is like really listening, like really understanding what who is trying to say to you. And like just don't fall in the trap of doing exactly what they say, because they're not necessarily able to articulate that. I think that part of the art and science is about, really really understanding the latent needs and being able to absolutely articulate that and then inspire a whole organization to do something about it, and then really surprise and delight your who.
That's so interesting, because I think that, and again, it's this kind of, it makes me think about how historically people will say, if you'd asked people back in the day before cars were invented, what do you want? They would have said a faster horse. So it's like the intention is there, but the execution is what's familiar and not perhaps something that's perhaps more creative or different. How do you get a sense for what these latent needs might be? Because that's where creativity and innovation potentially really comes into its own.
Well, I mean, it's about interfacing with your users or non-users on a regular basis. I mean, that's where research and human-centered research, user research, actually really thrives as a craft, as a discipline.
So we're coming towards the end of the interview, and before I get to the last few questions,
really,
because you're so passionate about, we've gone through it really fast. But I would like to unpack a little bit more, because it's come up various times, and it's really important, not just to the world of technology and our careers in UX and human-centered research, but more broadly, empathy. I'm curious what it means for you.
What empathy means for me? I often talk about it is about understanding another person maybe better than they understand themselves. That means that you have to really genuinely and authentically want to really understand what's going on. And that, sometimes like sort of the breadth of that can go beyond any given problem statement. You have to understand the broader context. And that can be, that's so important, right? Empathy is really, really going beyond just sort of understanding what's happening in the micro interaction that you would have the privilege of having with any given customer of yours. It's really going beyond that and understanding the privilege of being part of something broader in their experience. And I think that is, to me, that is empathy. And that is not just in my professional life, that's certainly in my personal life as well. I think that that's an incredible universal life skill that I wish upon everybody. I have 3 kids, and I try to instill this very deeply and model this behavior where it's just, you have to go beyond what is sometimes the captain obvious that you can just see. You have to be curious and inquisitive and genuine in your desire and want to understand more. I think that's empathy.
I love that. The wanting to understand more, that kind of movement towards that curiosity that's really the driving force. So before we get to the last question, we know that there's some big changes coming up. When we're thinking about, for example, the deprecation of third-party cookies, which is going to rock the tech world and the ad world and the marketing world, how can or perhaps should the industry come together to meet this challenge and to build an internet that we, the users, feel safe with?
I mean, this is super
Yes, another tiny question.
Tiny question. And I think so. It's a very big change, no doubt about it. But the ads ecosystem has to evolve, right? It just has to. And users have been super clear, right? They've been super clear that their expectation of privacy is sort of at the core of like the next evolution. And they want to feel protected, and they want to be able to trust the ads that they see. And we are super, super committed to that. I know we play a pretty large part in the digital ads ecosystem, and so we're modeling that in everything that we do. I think that we need to be able to fund, quality journalism. We need to be able to fund the open internet and content for all. And so that, all businesses of all sizes have that opportunity to grow and reach people everywhere. And, the deprecation of third-party cookies at the back half of next year, it's all rooted in being more private and more safe. And that is by first principles, like absolutely the right thing to do. But it's going to require a mindset shift.
Yeah.
It really is, like, across the entire industry. A cookieless future is like, still something that I think a lot of people are trying to get their heads wrapped around, like, practically speaking, like, what's this going to look like? And I hope that, from what I'm trying to do with my team and what we're trying to do as a company, we're approaching this future absolutely from the core with understanding first principles of really what matters. And that is a private by design future, where we can also ensure the success of all parts of the ecosystem. And I think, we will continue to invest here. We will continue to embrace like first party relationships to do that. We will leverage like technology, like, machine learning and AI to like sort of model ourselves into that future, into that value that we so are responsible for, providing to all parts of the ecosystem. And we're really looking forward to that. I think that, one of those design principles or tenets that, we have all heard of in our lives is that creativity thrives in constraints. And I think that this is just yet another moment of inflection for us as an industry, and it's a responsibility. And a whole big part of that is, putting control back into, back into people's hands, and we are committed to doing that here. And I'm really, really feeling privileged to be a part of this inflection point. But I feel like we are very conscious of what it will mean for all parts of the ecosystem, and we are putting everybody front and center as we transition into this future.
And it is a big and exciting and interesting future. Watch this space.
Yeah.
So if people want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where are the best places to find you?
In my office or in design reviews. I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, this work it's profoundly important, and I'm very committed to helping, our organization and our company be, successful in helping provide the value to everybody in the ecosystem. And it just means that if I'm not here at work, Natalie, like I'm raising 3 kids in a suburban home and a dog.
Oh,
And I've chosen to spend my time like that. So you can find a little bit on LinkedIn, but hopefully you'll find me and a lot of the work that I do in all the products that you use every day at Google. And go find me in the quality of the experience that you have on my ad center, and the relevant ads that you see on search, on the relevant ads that you see on YouTube. And if you are an advertiser, I hope in the amazing experiences that we're providing you in our entire advertiser suite of products. So,
all right. And with that, that is a wrap.